Tonight, President Obama has made his decision on Afghanistan.
It is my intention to finish the job.
He'll lay it out for the nation in a primetime address next week. I'm Maggie Rodriguez. Also tonight, healthcare reform, disaster, or just what the doctor ordered? As Democrats and Republicans trade charges, we'll give you a reality check. Back to life. A man thought to be in a vegetative state for 23 years reveals he was aware of everything going on around him. And the battle by the bay. What to do about an invasion of hundreds and hundreds of hungry sea lions.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening. Katie is off tonight. President Obama is finally ready to announce his new strategy for the war in Afghanistan. It will come next week in an address to the nation. And the question is not whether he'll send more U.S. troops, but how many. By January, 68,000 will be on the ground in Afghanistan. And as our David Martin first reported earlier this month, the president is expected to approve most of the additional 40,000 troops that have been requested by the commanding General Stanley McChrystal. But that could be a tough sell in Congress. Chief White House correspondent Chip Reid begins our coverage tonight. Chip?
Well, good evening, Maggie. After a long, agonizing process, the president finally said today he's made a decision on Afghanistan. But he also said he's still not ready to tell the American people exactly what that decision is.
It took the president nearly 2.5 months and 9 long meetings with his war council to finally settle on a new plan for Afghanistan.
It is my intention to finish the job.
But he refused to say how many more troops he'll send, saving the details for his primetime address next Tuesday. But as CBS News first reported 2 weeks ago, the president is expected to authorize most of the troops requested by General Stanley McChrystal, somewhere between 30 and 40,000. Even with additional troops, though, the challenges are staggering. The Afghan government is corrupt and incompetent. The Taliban has been gaining ground. And with 297 U.S. troop deaths so far this year, it's by far the deadliest year of this 8-year war. The president says it's essential to keep Al-Qaeda from using Afghanistan to launch more attacks like 9/11. But with only 32% of Americans supporting a troop increase, the president is walking into a political firestorm.
If this war is worth fighting, it's worth paying for.
Many liberal Democrats strongly oppose the troop surge, noting that 30,000 more troops will cost about $30 billion a year. They're calling for a war tax to pay for it.
If you don't do that, you shove the bill off on our kids. I don't think that's very smart.
The president is relying on his powers of persuasion to turn the tide.
I feel very confident that when the American people hear a clear rationale for what we're doing there and how we intend to achieve our goals, that they will be supportive.
Supportive, but for how long? U.S. troops could be in Afghanistan another 5 to 10 years, according to CBS News national security analyst Juan Zarate.
It will take time for the troops to get on the ground. It will take time for them to be effective.
If the war really does last another 5 to 10 years, this will be the longest war in American history, and President Obama could be sending troops to a war that will continue long after he leaves office. Maggie?
Chip Reid at the White House. Thank you, Chip. While the president said that he intends to finish the job, he was also quick to point out that the Afghan people must ultimately provide for their own security. Right now, a huge effort is underway to train more Afghan soldiers, but it's proving to be a very tough job. From Kabul, here's Mandy Clark.
This could be America's best exit strategy. Building a strong Afghan national army that would be the key to bringing security and stability to the country. I know to have a country, you need an army, this recruit says. I'm here to make Afghanistan. Making Afghanistan will require a fighting force that can protect its people, take over from coalition forces, and rid the country of widespread corruption.
It's critical for us to ever leave here that we have a sustainable Afghan National Army.
General Stanley McChrystal's plan calls for an increase in Afghan troops from the current level of 90,000 to 134,000 next year. McChrystal's ultimate aim is to have a force of 240,000. It's a recommendation that President Obama is still considering. Basic training here lasts 8 weeks, and at this facility alone, over 40,000 soldiers can graduate a year. But the challenge isn't the training, it's finding the soldiers in the first place. Some would-be recruits are hedging their bets on who will be here in the long term, the Afghan security forces or the Taliban. For others, their tribe or ethnic group comes first, country second. Yes, people think about tribe first, but this is wrong, he says. If we build our country, then we can protect our tribes. U.S. trainers have also been frustrated by the fact that some recruits join the army in the winter, only to switch over to the Taliban when the fighting really starts in the summer, simply because the Taliban pay more. And it's not just soldiers. In this insurgent video, Afghan police are seen handing over guns and other weapons to the Taliban. These pictures triggered an investigation into whether cowardice or corruption was to blame. Cases like this one feed a growing skepticism about Afghan security forces and their training. The one thing that's not in doubt is that Afghan forces will have to be in the forefront of the battle to win over the Afghan public and restore faith in the government here. Mandy Clark, CBS News, Kabul.
From CBSMoneyWatch.com tonight, new concerns about the strength of the economic recovery. The government now says that the economy was growing more slowly in the third quarter than first thought. 2.8%, not 3.5%. And the Federal Reserve says it expects unemployment to remain high next year, as high as the current 10.2%. And if you add in the underemployed, which refers to those who have settled for part-time work or have given up looking entirely, that rate is actually 17.5%. To the housing market now, and a new survey out today, which finds that home prices in 20 major cities are up for the fourth month in a row. But they're not rising fast enough to stop a growing crisis. Nearly 1 out of 4 mortgage holders in this country, nearly 10.7 million people, are now underwater. That means that they owe more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. And Ben Tracy in Los Angeles tells us that that could threaten a housing and jobs recovery.
Are we going home, huh?
When Lauren and Diana Montag bought this house in Southern California in 2008, they never imagined they'd be worried about losing it just a year later. They now owe $279,000 on their mortgage, but the latest tax bill shows the house is worth just $194,000, putting them almost $90,000 underwater.
Shocked, because now all our plans are changed.
Both of them are now unemployed and are no longer planning any home improvements.
Anything we put into it now, somebody else is going to be enjoying maybe in another year, year and a half.
Nationwide, 10.7 million households, 23%, owe more on their mortgage than their home is worth. Nevada is the hardest hit state. A whopping 65% of mortgages are underwater. In Arizona and Florida, it's nearly half the homes. Michigan and California are also struggling. And for those out of work, being underwater is like an anchor holding them down. They can't sell and their job search is limited.
For people who want to move in order to find a job, they find themselves really stuck.
And here in California, experts say it could be 15 years before some homeowners are above water again. So even some of those who can afford their payments are choosing to walk away.
Given the two options, continuing to pour money into a black hole versus my credit score taking a hit, this seems a better option.
Gas bill 10.
Lauren and Diana worry that walking away may be their only way out.
I'm enjoying every moment that I'm here because I may not get to be here that much longer. Come on.
A reality they never thought would hit this close to home. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Come on.
You may remember the story back in the summer about a plane that was en route from Houston to Minneapolis and had to be diverted to Rochester, Minnesota because of a storm. The 47 passengers on board were forced to stay on the plane nearly 6 hours. Today, the Transportation Department hit Continental Airlines and ExpressJet with unprecedented fines, $50,000 each. And Delta-owned Mesaba Air was fined $75,000 for not opening the airport to the stranded travelers. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, the debate over health care reform, what it would really mean to you. We give the House and Senate bills a reality check. Congress has begun its Thanksgiving break. Senate Democrats going home thankful they cleared a major hurdle on health care reform, voting to open a floor debate when they get back next week. In the meantime, debate continues all over the airwaves about what the House and Senate bills would really mean for you and me. So we asked congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes to give us a reality check.
Add the Senate and House bills together, and they are 4,064 pages worth of reforms that Democrats say will revolutionize the health care system and Republicans say will bankrupt it. No wonder many Americans have doubts.
They're rushing it through. They should give it more thought.
I don't think I want a public option because I don't think the government handles things too well.
Concerns run so deep that the most recent CBS News poll shows only 40% of Americans approve of the proposed health care plans in Congress. 45% disapprove. Polls show one of their main concerns is the price tag, around $1 trillion over 10 years.
It's going to bring up the deficit.
That's not true, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which analyzed both health reform bills. It found the Senate bill would not only pay for itself through a raft of cuts and taxes, but would actually reduce the deficit by $130 billion over 10 years. Likewise, the House bill would put $138 billion back into the budget.
I think what we have is an honest, nonpartisan attempt to evaluate what each bill will cost.
But there's a catch, say Republicans. They argue Democrats artificially lowered the cost of reform by imposing new taxes years before the tax credits would kick in to help Americans buy insurance.
Move over, Bernie Madoff. Tip your hat to $1 trillion scam.
And then there's the question of who pays.
They're going to end up running up the cost, and it's going to trickle down to taxes.
That's true, but Democrats contend the bill's major taxes are aimed at the wealthiest Americans. The Senate bill, for example, boosts the Medicare payroll tax, but only for individuals making more than $200,000 a year, while the House bill hits those making more than $500,000 with a 5.4% surtax on income. Republicans argue that many of the other proposed taxes on medical device and drug makers or on high-cost insurance plans will quickly get passed along to consumers.
And the truth that nobody will say is that's how it's supposed to work. The only way that we're going to create better incentives in healthcare is if people understand some of the costs.
By a 4-to-1 margin, the CBS News poll shows seniors are the most concerned that healthcare reform will hurt, not help them. At the Catonsville Senior Center in Maryland, it's the proposed cuts and changes to Medicare.
Show of hands if you're happy with Medicare.
That have them worried.
I need knee replacements. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have them under the new plan.
Here's the reality. The bills would make significant cuts to Medicare. In the case of the House bill, $573 billion worth of cuts over 10 years. That's achieved primarily by slowing the growth in Medicare payments to hospitals, nursing homes, and rehab centers. Democrats say it's a way to encourage quality of care over quantity. But the government Centers for Medicare and Medicaid warn the move might lead hospitals to end their participation in Medicare.
What many Americans are wondering, of course, is what they're getting in return for all these cuts and taxes. Will health care reform actually reduce health care costs?
I don't mind putting money in, but it has to be equitable. I mean, it's killing me financially.
The fact is, no one knows whether reform would bend the cost curve downward or drive some premiums up. And then there are other problems. That hotly debated public option would only cover an estimated 3 to 6 million people and wouldn't kick in for 4 or 5 years. Plus, both the Senate and House bills would leave at least 12 million Americans uninsured. The real strength of the plans, experts say, lies in the generous tax credits that will help millions of low and middle-income Americans pay for their health insurance.
I think the most important part of all of the bills is that it recognizes that health insurance for families is a matter of affordability.
When it comes to reform, Americans may be uncertain about the details, but 8 in 10 tell CBS News there is a need for fundamental change.
Any reform is better than no reform.
We have a class of people that really don't have anything at all.
Congress, however, is finding that the path toward health care reform is not as clear as the nation's wish to get there. Nancy Cordes, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
One note from overseas, election season in the Philippines has been marked by violence, which now includes a mass killing. And today, the government declared a state of emergency in 2 southern provinces. Supporters of a candidate for governor were kidnapped yesterday. 46 bodies were later recovered, including those of as many as 20 journalists who were traveling with the group. Now, to put that number in perspective, worldwide, 35 journalists were killed in prior incidents this year. 42 were killed in all of 2008. We'll be right back. Imagine being trapped inside your own body, unable to talk, but aware of everything going on around you. For 23 years, a man in Belgium lived that nightmare. All that time, doctors believed he was in a coma, but as Elizabeth Palmer reports, he wasn't.
In 1983, a car accident left Rom Houben in what doctors diagnosed as a vegetative state, alive but unable to feel or think. Enter Dr. Stephen Lauries more than 2 decades later to prove them wrong using the latest brain imaging technology.
We put him in the PET scanner and the fMRI, and we saw his brain was functioning normally. So he was not vegetative, definitely not.
Rom's mother, Fina, is proud to show photos of her son before the accident, and she never believed, once injured, that he stopped feeling or hearing. I could tell, she says, when he was in a bad mood or when he was in pain. Once doctors realized his brain was working, the challenge was how to help him communicate. Although it's impossible to see Ron's hand move, his specially trained assistant can feel it, and she translates these micro movements into words on a keyboard. I shall never forget the day when they discovered what was really wrong with me, Rom wrote. It was my second birth. For Dr. Lauries, Rom's story was both thrilling and alarming. In a study of patients diagnosed vegetative by doctors, which means their life support could legally be switched off, Dr. Laurie found 40% of them showed signs of consciousness.
I think, of course, 40% is unacceptable. We need to do better, and it's only with accurate data, with objective measurements, that we'll be able to make the best decision for the patient.
A decision that, in this case, brought Rom Houben, in his own words, back to life. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, London.
Now to a scientific milestone. 150 years ago today, Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species was published, marking the anniversary of first edition copies sold for more than $170,000 at Christie's Auction House in London. This particular book spent decades on a shelf in an Oxford professor's bathroom until his son-in-law discovered its origin. Coming up next, who's the king of the wharf? An unusual turf war in San Francisco. We leave you tonight in San Francisco, where there's a new population explosion, one that John Blackstone shows us is hard to miss and even harder to handle.
Where does a 500-pound sea lion sleep? At San Francisco's Fisherman's Wharf, just about anywhere it wants. What have you learned about sea lions watching them here?
Well, so far they've outwitted me, so.
For months, Hedley Prince has been trying to stop sea lions taking over a dock used by fishermen and pleasure boaters. No trespassing, the sign says.
That's correct.
What are they doing here?
Well, they don't read.
Prince has good reason to worry. He's seen how they've taken over further down Fisherman's Wharf at Pier 39.
I've never seen so many, and there's like a boom in the population of them now or something.
In 1950, there were only about 10,000 sea lions on the West Coast. Today, their population is estimated at 300,000. Pier 39 alone is home to some 1,500, up from the few dozen that moved here in 1990.
It's fascinating. I love it.
The noisy invaders proved such a hit with tourists. Pier 39 merchants have done nothing to chase them away. But for others on the bay, sea lions have become a nuisance, demanding constant vigilance. All along the West Coast, fishermen complain about their big appetite for already dwindling salmon. Although they're trespassing, the law is on their side. The Marine Mammal Protection Act makes it largely illegal to even bother these guys.
If we were being infested by slime eels, people wouldn't care what we did to them, but because these things are cute, got whiskers and big brown eyes, you know, we're pretty limited in what we can do.
What he has done is put up some barriers to discourage the sea lions. But in the battle against these blubbery beasts, it's a small victory along an ever more crowded shoreline. John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
And that's the CBS Evening News. For Katie Couric, I'm Maggie Rodriguez. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you in the morning on The Early Show. And for the latest news online, go to cbsnews.com. Good night.